Thanks for joining our Little Lunch Lectures today. I think I know almost all of you on the call today, but just in case, I'm Stephanie Borrett. I'm the Director of Donor Relations at the Coastal Land Trust, and so glad you've joined today. First, a few announcements. Even though we're not on Facebook Live yet, we are recording, so if you don't want to be on camera, take your video off at this time, and your video won't be captured. There will be a few links in the chat for you to check out at some point. E-news, donate, more information about the lectures, and Laura's going to post those for us. We'll keep everyone on mute, but we will have time at the end for questions and answers, and you can put questions in the chat if you want. That also works. So I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Our illustrious speaker is Jesica Blake. She's been with the Coastal Land Trust since 2002 and is currently serving as both Stewardship Director and our Associate Director. Jessica oversees monitoring and enforcement of all our conservation properties as well as preserve management. So she has a lot of stewardship stories to share with us today. Jess, thank you so much for being here and telling everyone what it takes to keep our promise to care for conserved lands forever.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks for having me. Like I said, this is going to be a more casual little lunch lecture, and I do encourage you to answer some of my questions in chat. We're going to have sort of a chat conversation throughout this process. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and make sure that all my technology works well. So, like Stephanie said, I serve as the Director of Stewardship for the Coastal Land Trust and have been here for 18 years. So I'm definitely more wrinkly than when I started working here. And there is no shortage of stories. Our stewardship work varies from field days that will make you laugh and ones that maybe even scare you to tons and tons of office days that are filled with paperwork. So let's start at the beginning. This obviously is a meme that I have seen go around Facebook, and everyone thinks that we have all these great jobs. So your friends think that you're playing with turtles, and my mom thinks that I am playing with snakes way too much. The world thinks I'm a tree hugger. Some scientists think that maybe we're trying to save the world, but who knows? I'm pretty convinced that I'm a snake wrangler, and at one point I will wrestle an alligator. But what I actually do is stand outside in all conditions of weather and try to make sure our conservation values are upheld. So if you had joined us last week for the Little Lunch Lecture, which was the Salters Creek dedication, you already know that the Coastal Land Trust is pretty darn good at protecting great properties. And we use many tools and many funding sources to do it. But after the project is closed, there is much more work to be done. And that's what we call stewardship. It's the long-term protection of the properties and of the conservation values that make those properties special. And it's forever, and forever is a very long time, let me tell you. But before I tell you some of the more interesting moments in stewardship and the reason we stay here for 18 years, let me first justify my job a little bit, because one, my boss is listening, and two, I want to tell you the what and the whys of stewardship. And then we'll move on to the how and finish with some memorable stories in the field. So the what of it all, because we are so good at land protection, we've built up quite a large stewardship portfolio. Here are our current stats to put things in perspective. Our stewardship program touches every single easement and every single property we own at least once a year. And quite a few of those we visit more often than once a year. So with 31 counties covering the entire coastal plain of North Carolina, it makes for quite a few road trips. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the boring parts of this, but as I said earlier, stewardship is all of the work that comes after we close on a land protection project. And it includes things like doing baseline documentation reports, monitoring everything at least annually, even enforcing those easement restrictions. But we also incorporate things like active land management. You'll see here a prescribed burn at BW Wells, and restoration like tree planting, wiregrass planting. And we also provide landowner assistance. Now, I want to say that while there are lots of fun stories in the field with our landowners, we don't tell stories about our landowners because they're our people and we treat them like family. I consider them my giant conservation family. And even if they push my buttons sometimes, we always work it out. So you're not going to hear landowner stories today. If you're here for that, I'm so sorry. overall, stewardship is perpetual responsibility. Our program goal for the stewardship program is protection permanence. And we are here to make sure those conservation values survive and thrive long after a project closes. I'm driving a lot of things here. So why do we do it? Well, aside from it's just the right thing to do, and it's what we committed to do when we started that land protection project, I'm mostly in it for the glamorous outfits that you see in the corner. Like literally that's why I work here, so I can wear those clothes to work. But no, there are more specific reasons, legal reasons, that we do hold the promise of protection. And I'm not going to elaborate them here because that's kind of really deep diving. But if anyone has questions at any time, feel free to 1, post them in the chat, or 2, email me afterwards and we can have a deeper conversation on just why we do stewardship. All right, well, the last learning piece of this little lecture, how do we pay for the things that we must do? Well, the Coastal Land Trust is committed to funding its stewardship program and has a stewardship endowment that provides interest that covers most of our costs. We are currently in the process of raising money to get that endowment fully funded at a level that will cover all of our costs. And most recently, this endowment was named in honor of our founder and fearless leader, Executive Director Camilla Hurlip. To help us reach our stewardship endowment goal, you can go to this link that's right there up on your screen, and I'm feeling like Stephanie's going to throw it in chat as well, and you can go online to donate. So now that I've done our little shameless self-promotion, I'm going to get to the reason that I'm sure most of you are here, to see pictures and stories from the field. Now that you know the basics of the Coastal Land Trust Stewardship Program, let's dish some dirt. Like I said, we monitor properties every year. And so here is a picture in the bottom corner of Janice Allen, our Director of Land Protection, and I way back before this job made me old, monitoring a conservation property. We also do restoration work on properties, like the picture in the bottom left-hand corner of a controlled burn at BW Wells. And we deal with issues that every landowner deals with, from posting and painting boundary lines to dealing with trespassers. And man, are there trespassers. When we are in the field, we work in swamps and we work in forests. We work in fields and we work in farms. 31 counties has a ton of amazing habitats to protect, and we do a little bit of everything. We work in the heat of the summer, like in this selfie on the bottom, where my face matches my vest in that 100-degree weather. We work in the cold of winter, like a coastal plain winter though, not New England winter. And you'll see former employees, Kristen and Jen, doing a baseline documentation report because we had a year-end deadline. So the coldest day of the year was the year we were in the field, and it was below freezing. We even work in allergy season. So if you check out that boot right there, those boots are actually brown, but what you see on there is pollen. That is how much pollen we get covered with when we're in the field. And now we work during a pandemic. So you'll notice our lovely stewardship biologist up in the top right corner, Melissa, wearing a mask because she was going to meet outside with one of our landowners. And we'll work in the field with a mask. We'll work in the field in any condition. So let's just ease into a few stories. We go places that have no roads. Sometimes we drive places that we thought we had roads, but we ended up not having them. And we ended up having nowhere to turn around. We go many places that can get your truck stuck. We were driving down a soil road to monitor an easement. This was a while ago. And the soil road looked like the one in the top left-hand corner, but then it got narrower and narrower and smaller until it might have been a four-wheeler path that was probably used 4 years ago. And then it didn't exist anymore. And the trees where we were just close enough together that any sort of 15-point turn was not going to get us facing the direction back out. And we needed to get back out. Attempting to turn around also made reversing back out less possible. So at this moment, when everybody's anxiety is starting to heat up, you have to get outside the truck, take a deep breath, take a great picture, and realize you're somewhere incredibly beautiful. Apologize profusely to your coworker because you have basically canceled all of her plans for the rest of the day, and we're hoping to be out before the sun goes down. And you take your time getting back on track while making sure not to get more stuck, because that's always a possibility. This particular situation, it took us about 4 hours to get that truck turned around, and a lot of potentially bad words in the field. But we worked together as a team. We got back out. We made it home. And the good news is, so far, we've always made it home. That truck stuck right there at the bottom was not from that day. I'm going to let you know that everyone at our office at one point or another that drives that truck has gotten it stuck, and that time it wasn't me. Well, did I mention how glamorous the working in stewardship really is? In the field, we do all sorts of things. We paint signs like this one at Springer's Point Preserve, and we mark boundaries. We are a full-service, one-stop stewardship shop. So, speaking of boundaries, one time we were headed out for a basic day of marking boundaries, and it didn't end up that way. Janice and I were headed to one of our preserves to mark boundary lines and post the property, since our visit the week before had showed us there were some interesting and unusual, not by us, paint marks on some of our trees. So we figured we'd go back out and throw up some more no trespassing signs, just to let people know that we're there and our presence is known. We're not an absentee landowner. We're paying attention. And as we got to the last turn before the preserve, and I might say that it does take an hour and a half to get to any of these particular situations, so you're thinking about it. But we're coming around the turn at the very last turn on the soil road before we see this preserve. And what do we see? We see coroner vehicles and caution tape on our preserve. That's not something I was expecting to see that day at all. It definitely makes you a little confused, but also curious as to what's going on. So let me start by saying there was not a dead body on the property, but can anyone guess what was actually going on here? Throw up an answer in the chat and we'll see what you guys are thinking versus what's actually happening, because this is going to be one I think is hard to guess. Stephanie, will you read some of the chat if they're popping up? Let's see. Here we go. All right. Ooh.
Was there a hunting accident?
Not a hunting accident.
Was it poaching?
It was not poaching. It was not dead trees. It was not dead dog. All right, I know you guys aren't going to guess this, and I don't want to take all the lunchtime, but what happened was those particular blue markings from the week before were trespassing from a paintball club. And the paintball club had marked the area, so it was sort of their field. And when they were out trespassing over the weekend prior, they tripped over what they thought was a grave. And so to make sure that they weren't going to get accused for whatever not bad thing has happened out there, they did call the authorities. The authorities came in, and it turns out it was an old agricultural grave. So it's just a cow buried in the ground a long time ago, but coroner and trespassers all in the same space. So that happens. Well, also one of the things that we do more often than not, and it seems more often now, is we clean up after hurricanes. We only clean things that for safety purposes on our properties that have visitors. If a tree falls in the woods and it isn't harming a trail or a structure, and it's not going to harm anyone that visits the property, we let nature run its course. But there are lots of days where we spend cutting trees, fixing things, and tons of volunteers that come and help us do all of this great work. But we also go places with very, very cool plants. Here you'll see spider lilies on the Black River and Venus flytraps that we have on quite a few of our preserves. This one in particular is at the Stanley Reeder Carnivorous Plant Garden, and there is a quarter in that photo for perspective on size. And one of the great things about working somewhere and going to properties year after year is seeing the differences in them. This picture on the bottom is actually of a pond, but the pond was during a drought empty. So we were able to see the cypress knees and all the stuff that usually is underwater. Not only will we go places with very cool plants, but we get to go places with amazing forests. From the giant hardwoods of the Ball-Gray Tract in Bertie County, to Jurassic-like swamps on the Waccamaw, to unique and spectacular marl outcroppings like Allen Creek, some days our office has quite the breathtaking view. But I want you to realize that for every moment of breathtaking view, there's also something that's gonna make you laugh. When we were walking this boundary at the Waccamaw in the middle photograph, this tree had fallen on the boundary line. This made a simple task of walking the boundary line slightly more difficult because that tree was super, super long and we were trying to follow flagging. So I most graciously climbed over the downed tree, and by graciously, that is not even the right word. I sort of flopped up and over it and lost my footing and slid down the other side of the tree into the mud. And so poor Evan did not know whether or not to laugh at me or help me up. Tripping and falling in the field makes for some of the funniest moments that we can have. And they have full belly laughs. And as long as you can laugh at yourself and you don't mind getting a little dirty, even the most inconvenient falls end up being okay, as long as you're safe. Well, we also go places with lots of wildlife. It's not uncommon to see snakes and alligators. If you guys want, you can tell me in the chat what type of snake you see here on the left. This is a photograph that Melissa, our stewardship biologist, took last year at one of our properties. And I'll tell you a little bit of time about when I was monitoring a property a long time ago, before technology. I was trying to find a corner marker on the riverfront of the Cape Fear, and I was using a compass. Back before I had my phone or my iPad or my technology. And the compass was not working for me because we were under very large power lines. So the magnetic field was getting interrupted and I was getting really, really frustrated. And I could not find this corner. And I'm shaking the compass and all of a sudden I hear a noise. And I was distracted, which means I wasn't paying as much attention as I usually like to do by myself in the woods. And I look over and I see an alligator, which doesn't usually startle me because we do see alligators like this all of the time. However, I started to have that uneasy feeling and I look to the left of me, the right of me, and I notice that there's an alligator nest on this side and an alligator on the other side of me. And I am standing in between an alligator and her nest. So needless to say, that was the end of that field day because my heart rate was up and I was safe and definitely had to take out of that area. That was one of my unnerving days where you do come home feeling a little bit scared. But nothing unnerves me more than being in the field with wild boar or feral hogs. So we have a lot of wild boar feral hogs on our Waccamaw property, and Jen Rogers, who used to work with us, and I were marking boundary lines deep, deep in the woods. This property adjacent has a pen where they trap and catch the feral hogs because they're destructive to the habitat there. And we noticed when we got there that the fence was open to the pen and there was no hogs in it. And we were like, well, that seems strange. But we went about our day. And as the day went on, we were getting hot and sweaty and a little cranky and we wanted to just finish. But we kept hearing noises and we kept hearing noises. And finally, I look at her, she looks at me. The noises are so close that it's just not okay. And you just decide that we're no longer in a safe situation and we call it a day. So we pack up our paint, we try to head out the way we come, and just on the way out, we see a group of feral hogs, and we were justified in knowing that that's what was going on. Definitely making some good stewardship calls, and I would like to give Jen props for that because she does keep us safe. But for every not so fun moment, there's an equally cool one. So what you see here is what I like to refer to as our unicorn days. There's some properties up in Carteret County that have white deer, and this particular photograph, while not a professional one by any means, because you can see my truck mirror in the bottom left-hand corner there, is a white deer in one of the conservation properties right after a burn. So you can see the contrast. And every time we see one of those out there, we call them our unicorn moments at the end of the world. Because this property, when we drive out there, it takes hours to get there, and it does feel like it's on the edge of the earth. Coastal plain is flat. It gives you that perspective. And of course, we get to occasionally see some of our black bears. Not very often do you get to see them, but on the days that you do, it's not the scary moment. It's the moment where you wish you had your camera. So for every black bear I've seen, I've only had one photograph that actually came out. This photo actually is by Angela Carl, who was at the Nature Conservancy. And the reason we got that close to the black bear is we were able to work with the Wildlife Resources Commission, and this was a release. But we do know the black bears are there, even though we don't see them very often. That photo on the right-hand side is my size 9 boot next to a fresh bear print that we saw while our truck was stuck in the woods at the end of the earth. So all of these things sort of pile up together, and you have to remember just to take a deep breath and work through it. I will admit that after I took this photograph, I did slip in that mud and fall flat on my rear. And Jen did take a photograph of it. However, you guys don't get to see that. So we work on the coast, like I said, 31 counties, but it involves all types of water. So I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that there's tons of water out there. We like to protect properties that have an impact on water quality. From the Black River on the left-hand side, that day we walked up to the Three Sisters, to restoration, shoreline restoration on Ocracoke Island. We work on all types of water. Sometimes the water's super high, like in this photograph you'll see with the bench that's usually on the edge, all the way in the water. And since we are a nonprofit and we have already spent hours getting to these places into the woods, we do spend time trying to get that perfect shot for the newsletter, because everyone in the nonprofit is a fundraiser and we all contribute to that moment. I have to admit to this particular time that I fell in the creek trying to get that photograph. And one more story before I try to get through this. Not only do we deal with all these fun things, and you guys might think that, oh, hey, they spend time kayaking all the time, but we also deal with some pretty stressful situations. This is a trespassing issue that we had on one of our preserves. On the left-hand side, you will see basically secret code markings on trees because there was a drug running operation that was happening on this preserve. On the right-hand side, that's actually one of the sheriffs that escorts us to these properties. Every time we go out there, we don't go by ourselves anymore, and they were investigating what was a squatting tent campsite in the drug running area. So, surprise, we also deal with drug runners. And just know, all of these lovely things that we talk about, we also deal with every single plant that has thorns and ticks and itchy plants like poison ivy. Can anyone tell me why on this particular slide I have that picture in the top right-hand corner? I know it looks beautiful, but why is it in this category? Answer in chat. I know you know it. Yes, Camilla with the win. Red bugs. That's right, Beth. Red bugs. Yes, very much so. Every time I see Spanish moss, it just makes me itch because most of the time when we're in the woods, it has chiggers. So ticks, chiggers, thorns, poison ivy, snakes, all of those things here to counteract the days that we get to paddle on the Black River. You guys have any questions or comments or concerns about all of the things and that I've just briefly taken you on a tour of why my job is cool?
Feel free to unmute and ask a question.
Yeah, come on. You can do it in chat. You can unmute. You can ask a question. I'm going to go to the next slide, but we're going to have a conversation because I just want to let you know that while it looks like we do all of these fun things, there is a lot of staff on the Coastal Land Trust that spends time in the field. So our Fearless field staff has Melissa and Evan and then Janice and Lee. All of us go into the field in all of those conditions to make sure that those conservation values are upheld and protected. So from the start to the finish and everything in between, from drug running to chiggers to trespass issues to being able to do prescribed burns, this staff is able to make sure your conservation values are protected. All right, well, of course, I'm going to circle back around. And if none of this scared you off and you are interested in potentially joining us in the field one day, feel free to volunteer at the Coastal Land Trust. You can email AmeriCorps@coastallandtrust.org, and in a few weeks, someone will get back to you. Right now, we're on a little break from AmeriCorps. And of course, like I mentioned early on, we have to pay for all this crazy work. So to donate, make sure you go to coastallandtrust.org/stewardship funds.
Somebody wants to know if the paintballers got busted. Like, they kind of called the cops on themselves.
They did, and we did not actually get to interact with the paintballers, but they never came back. So we were prepared, and we do enforce trespass issues. You know, the field stuff is fun. The paperwork is required, but the enforcement is where really the hard work comes in. And we are very active and adamant to make sure to have all the paperwork and all the field site visits lined up so that we are able to enforce things like trespass.
Very good.
And I will just let everybody know that a lot of our properties do have wildlife cameras and even security cameras on them because trespass is such an issue, and we are serious about that enforcement effort.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Jessica, for sharing some of those stories with us. I have seen a few of those pictures before, but not all of them. And really, I think that white deer looks like a llama, really.
No, we call it a unicorn. And catching the moment right after a burn to see the contrast between, you know, black char at the bottom of the pines and seeing white deer run through, it really does feel magical.
That's cool.
I want that picture, and you've been holding out on me.
Oh, God. There are pictures that I just couldn't put in here that were just too embarrassing for moments. But that same white deer day was the day we got our truck stuck there. And I will let you know there's no cell phone coverage. And it takes 25 minutes from the front gate to the property where we were. And it may have involved a little bit of crying from more than one staff member. But you know what you do? You cut down little tiny trees and you put it underneath the mud and you build an area and you creatively get out because you have to rely on yourself. No one's coming to save you on those.
Jessica, I'm curious, which of the properties is your favorite to go visit?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I have to say that one of my most favorite field site visits in the last couple of years was on our Waccamaw Preserve site. That being said, I haven't seen Island Creek yet, and I'm looking forward to it in September. But the Waccamaw River site, we were up to our waist in the swamp, marking boundary lines. It was super, super cold. The water was freezing, so at least there weren't mosquitoes. And you walk in and you're like holding on to a tree to mark this boundary line, and you look around and you can't see or hear any human. There's no sign at all. And you kind of just feel like you are alone in the world. And for a hot second, you get to take a breath and just really be connected. And then Evan yells at you to hurry up, but whatever.
Thanks.
All right, well.
Any other questions from the audience?
Sweet. Well, thanks for joining us today and helping me take a little trip down memory lane, because every time I see these moments, I remember all the great work that we do, all the amazing land protection, all of the funny stories where at the moment you might be bleeding from thorns, but when you get home, you get to sit down and laugh about it. And every single one of these properties slowly just wins a place in your heart after you've been on them.
Thanks so much, Jessica.
That's awesome.
All right, guys.
Before we all
Hey.
sign off, I would like
Hey,
to.
Sonny.
I want to remind everybody about the next couple of weeks of Little Lunch Lectures. Marissa Blackburn will be with us next week to talk about Diamondback terrapin management areas and salt marshes. And then the week after, Bill Rainey is going to talk about the Society for Masonboro Island and how that community organizing effort helped to save one of the most beautiful places, in my opinion, on the North Carolina coast. Just a reminder that you can find recordings of the lectures on our website. It's one of those links in the chat /lectures. And again, you heard Jessica mention the Camilla Herlovic Legacy Stewardship Fund a couple of times today. So if you would like to help ensure that our saved lands are cared for forever, or if you would like to ensure that Jessica and the stewardship team never run out of exciting, surprising stewardship adventures, please support that fund. And you can do that today online at coastallandtrust.org/stewardship-fund. So I do look forward to seeing you guys next week and the weeks after. We have every Friday planned through the end of September. So there's so much to talk about with the North Carolina coast, and we're so glad you join us. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Bye. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.